Smallville is the greatest superhero show of all time, with some of the best writing you will find in and out of comics, with funny, corny dialogue you can only find in an early 2000s show, but it also has amazing depth and long-form storytelling that nothing else can even hope to come close to. But for these reasons that I'm about to cover, this show falls off, and it's not for going on for too long or the acting getting worse, but it's for one specific reason that no one talks about. Smallville was written and created by Al Gough and Miles Millar. These names should sound familiar to you, with their most well-known writing credits being on the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, which in my opinion is the greatest superhero trilogy of all time, giving Peter Parker arcs that are still unmatched to this day. So while Raimi brought the sauce behind the camera, Al Gough and Miles Millar were crafting the masterpiece that is that trilogy, all while working on their own project on the side that would turn into Smallville. Al Gough and Miles Millar wrote two of the greatest characters in fiction, two characters that are very different, but somehow made both Peter and Clark Kent relatable to all audiences, with messages of responsibility, showing both the characters make mistakes and grow from them, showing these superheroes humanity. So not only did they write the greatest Spider-Man trilogy of all time, but they also made the greatest Superman project ever made. Al Gough and Miles Millar worked on 7 out of the 10 seasons of Smallville, and watching the show you can clearly see when they left and the major step down the show takes in the writing department. Smallville was focused on its originality, with major creative decisions that set the show apart, like making Clark Kent and Lex Luthor start out as best friends that slowly turn against each other. Smallville was focused on family ties and friendships and how they ultimately turn you into who you become. Many times this show explores what changes to that can alter how these characters would turn out. Like if Lex Luthor and Clark Kent switched parents, how they would turn out differently. Like if Clark was raised by Lex Luthor's father Lionel, he would have had a lack of morality, he would have had a lack of values, and he would have turned out to be a villain, like Ultraman. Lex Luthor, if he lived with the Kents and had Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent as his parents, would have lived a full life and been taught proper morals, proper values, and turned out to be a good man. Smallville stumbled in the end because they lost sight of this. The new writers focused more on destiny than how the people that surround these characters ultimately turn them into who they become. Lex ends up being the villain not because of his past, but simply because it was his destiny. That is one of my biggest issues with this show's ending. Lex Luthor in the end forgets his memories, literally everything that made him the villain and the character he was. And for some reason, he still turned out to be the villain. Another issue this series had was the whole Clark, Lana, and Lois dynamic. Don't even get me started. Lana and Clark lasted 8 seasons, and it was the best written couple in all of fiction. But the new writers came in and wrote Lana out and pushed Lois as the main love interest. Despite Al Gough and Miles Millar wanting to keep the show original, the new writers wanted the show to be as comic accurate as possible, which would have been fine if the show started out that way. But much like the Amazing Spider-Man movies, with Peter Parker having Gwen as his main love interest instead of Mary Jane, Smallville should have kept Lana and Clark together. Back when Amazing Spider-Man 2 was being made, they were faced with the same issue. Sony tried to get the director to include Mary Jane in the story, so it could be as comic accurate as possible. There's even deleted scenes of Mary Jane and Peter talking that didn't even make it into the final cut of the film because the director realized that it wouldn't make any sense if she was shoehorned into the story, in which Gwen Stacy is the main love interest. After all, we spent 2 whole movies focusing on their relationship. Peter and Gwen's chemistry was so good that even if they made us an Amazing Spider-Man 3, there's absolutely no way Mary Jane would have ended up with Peter, and I don't think anyone watching would have wanted that either. Even in Spider-Man No Way Home, when Andrew Garfield is talking to Tom Holland's Spider-Man, he refers to Gwen as his MJ, his main love interest, the person that he loves the most. Smallville focused on Lana and Clark for 8 seasons, 8 years of the exact same relationship in which there was so much buildup, so much chemistry, so much love. It was just beautiful storytelling from beginning to end. But then to cap it all off, Lana was written off, Lois was shoehorned in as the main love interest, and I understand that the chemistry was good for Clark and Lois, but it was nowhere near what Clark and Lana had. Lois was a great character in the show. She was brought in season 4 and she dated many characters, but there was one in particular that she had amazing chemistry with, and it wasn't Clark Kent, it was Oliver Queen. Their chemistry was perfect, the actors were amazing, the love story actually made sense, but the new writers came in and forced 2 relationships to end. both Oliver and Lois, and Clark and Lana, in order to make things as comic accurate as possible. Smallville, in the end, drifted away from everything that made it great, making it more about pushing away the original ideas and embracing what came before, with zero originality. I think the show's original end, if the original writers stayed, would have been very, very different. Lois and Clark wouldn't have ended up together. Much like in Arrow, with him not ending up with Laurel Lance, who he marries in the comics, he ended up with Felicity, a purely original character. Smallville would have ended with Lana and Clark together, after all the build-up they had, capping off 10 seasons together. The issues with Lex Luthor forgetting everything to make things as comic accurate as possible wouldn't have been there. He would have had all his memories, and he would have had a soft spot for Clark because they used to be friends. This show's last scene probably would have been the same. Clark becomes Superman, flies off, leaving the audience wanting more, but knowing he's Superman, we just can't go with him. But still, the show wouldn't have ever fallen off the way it did, and been consistently amazing and original all the way through.